Here we are, another episode of the High Ground, powered by Premier Companies. How's it going, Sal?
It's been an interesting last 10 minutes, I'll tell you that.
It always is when Glenn Longabaugh is in studio with us. So not remote. You're in the podcast room this morning. So how are things?
Things are great.
Things are great.
Yeah.
We're laughing.
Well, my pant legs are drying out. I've already been to the answer plot this morning.
Nice.
Walking through soybeans.
All right, walking through soybeans with the dews on.
We're laughing because Glenn's taken 3 phone calls here before we start recording. And Ryan points out that when you have a superstar as a guest,
this is what you deal with.
That's what you deal with.
Yep, you take what little moments the fleeting moments they can give you when you have somebody like Glenn in the house.
Green M&Ms and all the things
sure.
he demands.
I want to see your rider because I think your rider's probably fairly extensive. Be my guest.
Yeah.
Hey, question of the day for you, Glenn Longabaugh, this morning. What is your dumbest obsessive compulsive disorder?
Or at least your top 5.
Right. All right. Give us a dozen. Quick dozen.
Obsessive compulsive disorder.
Oh, I have lots of. I have so many things I obsess about. In fact, one of them, the reason why they're
that surprises me.
Well, one of the reasons, it surprises me. Well, this is. So when you do research work or you do demo work, like at the answer plot, if you're not a little bit obsessive, things are going to fall through the crack. And the reason why I took this call on you guys is this was Kyle Pearson, who is the mastermind of the answer plot program. He's the crew chief for Indiana and just does a wonderful job. But when I went through the answer plot this morning, it's like, you know what? These things are not correct, right? The population extreme by fungicide, which is to demonstrate the value proposition of fungicides in high stress environments, right? So when you crowd corn, for example, you increase the intercrop competition, and you actually increase, your incidence of disease, right? Because stress and population go absolutely hand in hand.
They're
right?
linear.
They are directly proportional. Yes, it'd be linear.
Yeah, he stole that from our last guest.
Now who's being obsessive, right?
Yeah.
So I was out of the plot this morning, and it's like, you know what? I swear that these treatments are backward. And by the way, when I took the original group through this year, I told them that the front was going to be treated, the back was going to be untreated. That's the way it looks this morning. And yet I know that the protocol, when I looked at the written protocol, it was backwards. So I called Kyle this morning. I said, I have to know for sure which was which. So he got with the interns, and sure enough, they had treated the front with fungicide 180 degree opposite of the answer plot protocol. So being obsessive, right, sometimes has advantages, right? When it comes to when it comes to keeping my truck clean, I'm not obsessive at all. But if we were going to put a pallet of seed in the back of that truck, you want to know about my crazy obsessiveness. When I stack things, right, this might be some artifact of a kid, with building blocks, but I want the bags all the same direction. I want them
tags
stacked
out.
Tags out.
Tags out. I get it.
If there's 3 bags out of place, I will sometimes unload a pallet to put them back together.
Yep.
I can't help myself.
I get it.
It's I know it's just the weirdest thing, but I can't help myself. And it doesn't bother me that everything is neat, but there are certain things that just have to be squared.
So if we asked your lovely bride what's your worst obsessive compulsive, was that what she would say, or would she say leaving the cap off the toothpaste or what, or something?
No. She's not particularly that way at all.
Is that right?
Not at all. I married so far up, it's unbelievable. and
as we all did.
Yeah, but sometimes I'm a little ashamed that, my lovely bride helps me at the farm now, right? Because I really don't, I have a full-time job and farm probably more than I should. And so, at home, she is still pretty much the queen, right? She is, she's all that at home. But when she comes to the farm, she's more like a borrowed mule. And I probably don't treat Donna with the kind of respect.
Well, you ought to treat her a little better and build her like a hog barn or something.
Yeah, there you go.
That's it. Nice.
No, we're not building any, no animal agriculture.
No?
I got grandkids now, and the idea of having animals when you have kids is just, it's very tempting. But thinking about breaking ice in the wintertime puts, that kind of squelches that really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, your water lines never freeze up if you don't have livestock.
That's right. They never do.
That's
exactly right.
It'd be another thing you'd have to obsess about.
Yeah.
Sal? What's your dumbest OCD?
I don't know. I don't really have probably just the common one, like checking the stoves and stuff when you leave the house. If you're going out, making sure that nobody left a curling iron plugged in or something. So probably just the regular dad stuff.
And I think we should preface this: that we're not making fun of that. There are things that bug people. That I'm with Glenn. It's some neatness neatness gets me, and my kids would tell you that it's checking doors that are locked. Every time we leave to go somewhere, I go to the shop and check the door, make sure it's locked. I make sure the back door to the house is locked. And so as I get in the car, now the joke is, did you check the building to make sure it's locked? Sometimes there's been times it hasn't been. So I've justified my actions.
I think the truck lock. I mean, I always like to hear the chirp or something go off. Think I didn't hear it, that sort of thing.
Yeah. That stuff bothers me.
Those two things don't bother me at all, right? We're about as secure as, maybe we don't want to. We don't want this on national.
I don't have any of my stuff locked up. Keys are in everything I have.
Right, and his address will be in the description.
So if you're at a convenience mart and you see a vehicle running, and I've ran inside, I rarely. Security is not that high on my.
We broke a guy of his company truck being unlocked all the time by having one sneak in the back seat with him while he was in a convenience store. When he come back out, jumped out and scared him from the back seat. I think his truck was locked fairly frequently after that. So
I got to tell this story real quick. We were down at we always take all the applicators and the branch managers and sales guys down to Del Hollow Lake every year. It's a great retreat for us. And we get over there, and of course, in southern Indiana, we don't lock a lot of vehicles as often as we should, probably. And so we get over there to the golf course, and somebody's like, "Where's the golf balls at?" And somebody goes, "Well, they left them in Andy's truck." And so we saw Andy's truck over there, parked at the golf course in Del Hollow Lake, and we're like, "Well, surely it's locked." No, right. Wide open, just got in there. His computer's in there and everything else.
So those of you that know Andy,
yeah, there you go. Right,
if you see his truck and
some
need something,
tools and
right.
computer.
And if Andy's watching, now he's got to feel somewhat singled out. So yeah,
we can edit that.
All right. Well, yeah. No, we probably won't. So Glenn, you have props.
I do.
What are you prepared to talk to us about? It's a busy time of year for you. We've already talked about the plots being ready. I mean, we're getting there. We're in August.
Yeah, absolutely. So later this week, by the way, we moved the answer plot date up because we thought it was important to set dates, to do trainings, to try to bring information to clients more timely, right? Because if we give it to them just after the fact, then we really only trained 11 and a half months ahead, and that really doesn't help our growers nearly so well as if we do things in a more timely fashion. So that's one of the things that we've really strived to do. And when we got planted early, we got the corn planted in April, we got soybeans planted in early May. That really gave us an opportunity to maybe move or accelerate the timing of this plot. That's one of the reasons why I was out there this morning. This particular ear came from the answer plot. And it's interesting. This is already at R5, right?
Wow.
By the modern phenology of corn, right? One of the things that's changed in the last 5 years, I'd say, I think it was 2018, maybe 2019, whenever Purdue changed their pocket guide as far as corn phenology. But corn phenology is staging, and R1, of course, is silking. R2 is blister. R3 is milk. R4 is dough. R5 is dent, and R6 is physiological maturity. One of the things that's changed is for years and years, when you got to R5, you were fully dented, and full dent is only about 2 weeks from physiological maturity. And that comes into play because if you are at R5, the chances, if you're fully dented at R5, the chances of you losing a lot of yield because it was predisposed to disease becomes, negligible, right? Very, very small chance. They changed phenology here a few years ago. Purdue now follows what most of the other land-grant universities follow, which is a dented kernel, right?
Just a kernel.
Just a dented kernel, right? Which makes it almost R4, really. There's hardly any difference in my mind today. When we are in dough, we have a few dented kernels. And so that could leave you basically a month to physiological maturity. And if you're a month from physiological maturity and that plant would be predisposed by something like tar spot or southern rust, then the likelihood that you would experience some yield loss is pretty high. So, but we're still within a month of physiological maturity. A lot of the fungicides are still active, right? They're, whether you're using a Valtima, a Tribopro, a Mirabis Neo, these top sell fungicides that we've applied at R1, I say that we normally apply at R1, that this year, because we had B stage applications, afforded us to push those back into R2.5, R2, R2.5. Those fungicides are still actively controlling spores, and even if they are waning, if a spore was to land on a plant today, right, one of these more like a transient disease like southern rust, it still has to go through a generation to sporulate, and even that generation then has a latent period, and by the time it would predispose this crop, we're going to be pretty far along. So it's encouraging, right? We're doing the right things. If you think about it, the rest of the country is really trying to play catch up to Southern Indiana, right? And I like to think that Premier and Winfield have had some play in that, right? Because we've been aggressively making multiple fungicide applications on both corn and soybeans. Now, soybeans are a little different story. Normally, by this time, early beans are at R5. We're starting to fill with seed, and you can still make a fungicide application and try to protect it through that R5 window, which is typically when we build most of the soybean biomass. I'm talking about the biomass of the seed is done at R5, and but I just came from the answer plot, and even the 2.9s and 3.0s still have a new flush of flowers and tiny little pods up in the uppermost racemes of that plant, right?
Is that because the rainfall we've had, or
I think it has to do with the fact that we've had additional rainfall, and these plants had been maybe under a little bit of stress, and this additional rainfall has encouraged those plants to go ahead and be reproductive, right? They're not conscious beings, but they have been designed to exploit weather, right? And old timers, this is not something new. Old timers would say, "Oh, those beans have taken the second growth," right? How many times have you heard growers say that 20 years ago? And yet, when you go out in the answer plot, you can see that today, right? There's pods all up the plant, and then you get to those upper couple branches. You'll see a cluster of flowers, which is called a raceme, and typically there's about 6 flowers on one raceme. There's some this morning I saw that there are 2 racemes fully flowered. Now, we will certainly abort the
you won't
vast
get all those, but
we'll,
that cluster of beans at the top generally equates to yield. I mean, that's a nice visual sign.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I saw that yesterday. We were, Boyd's plot was yesterday, and DeKalb did a wonderful job and had some good speakers come in. And, I got to take a look at some of Trent Boyd, right? That's our host there.
Yep.
And got to look at some of his soybeans, and there are certainly some incredible yield potential on those early planted beans. I mean, when you see 4, 5, and even 6 pods in those upper racemes, it is unquestionably going to be a really good crop, unless there's something that would happen to them. Since we've moved to soybeans, I would say one of the things that's really encouraging. I hate to start gloating that we don't have a lot of stink bugs in the crop this year, because
that's your arch nemesis.
Yeah, because how I feel about stink bugs. Immediately,
we'll give you a reference to a couple of other podcasts.
Yeah.
Boy, he hates them.
Yeah, normally I use some expletive about stink bugs, and
I've never heard you say stink bugs and not use it.
Expletive. Yeah, and you notice I'm still rubbing my forehead. You can tell when I'm stressed.
But you're doing well from a language standpoint.
I am. Well, I'm trying to clean up my act just a little bit, right?
Because you're hanging out with such high class people now.
That's right.
That is exactly it,
I get
Brian. Yeah, you guys you're a great influence on me, right? But no, the stink bugs aren't nearly as bad as what they have been. Now that doesn't mean there's no pests out there, and it doesn't mean we want you to pull the insecticide. And but possibly we don't need 2 insecticides, right? When we had stink bugs, we were using not only synthetic pyrethrins at really high rates, but we were adding things like imidacloprid or thiamethoxam, right? We were adding these neonics to ensure that those piercing sucking ones that don't really chew a lot of vegetation would get a fair dose of insecticide and at least contribute to helping predispose these insects, because they're hard to kill. But there's still Japanese beetles out there. Ryan, at what was your legacy plot over at Lagodi? That plot had crazy numbers of grape colaspis beetles, and grape colaspis beetles don't come from nowhere, right? They came from grape colaspis larvae, and those grape colaspis larvae, which look like a miniature white grub, are just damming on corn and soybeans both, but especially corn. One larvae will set corn on its heels. And I've seen this lots of times where used to be a problem behind clovers, right? If you had guys that used pastures or had some kind of legume in a field and then followed that with corn, you would oftentimes see, corn get up and then it would just almost like sit still, and you'd get to digging plants, and the roots would look pruned, right? When the nodal roots come out, the roots would be pruned off, but you couldn't normally find the critters. And with grape colaspis, the larvae leave holes behind, and what you have to do is dig the entire plant and then start at the bottom, because they'll immediately move down. They're actually pretty quick critters. But
I bet you didn't know that, son.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I knew you didn't.
And so we were talking about my compulsive behavior. I feel compelled to tell you the entire life cycle, right? Sal the other day asked
No, we don't have time.
Sal asked me the other day, he said, what are all these worms that we're seeing on the front of these sprayers? And of course I go into this, long dissertation of, well, these are not really, they're not parasitic organisms, right? These are worms from flies, the syrphid flies. And went into this big long deal. It was just absolute silence on the other end of the phone. I know I gave him entire.
Wait a second. So I got to tell you what he said. He said, no, it's surprising fly larva. So no punctuation. And I'm like, surprising fly?
Sorry.
I've never heard of surprising flies.
Surface. Yeah.
So anyway, and then he goes into his dissertation. Yes, from what you call corn flies or sweat bees. They are not Hymenoptera. They are Diptera. They are larvae. So he goes into this long and three more texts involving it. So
yeah, sorry. Well, it's so.
Now you know.
Yeah, but
I do.
Yeah,
so
now you know.
Yeah, so spell check kind of.
I'm guessing with your the terminology you throw around, I'm assuming it may just leave it. It's like, I don't know. I don't know.
Give up.
Yeah, spell check has
go.
So that should have said syrphid fly, right? So syrphid flies are they're in the order of Diptera, which is, so their larvae are called maggots, right? And so these are.
Tell them about this video. This sprayer was covered with maggots.
Yeah, we've been seeing this. This is not proprietary to our area. I've seen this in the western side of the state too. And it's really pretty gross, right? Normally on the front of a sprayer, you'll end up.
Yep, it is.
You'll end up with all these anthers, right? Because they're typically, the sprayers are not over the top of the tassels. They're bending these plants over when they're doing ground application. And yet these, what you'd know as sweat bees, steady johns, some hoverflies, right? Corn flies is kind of the common name. They're actually beneficials, right? They're syrphid fly eggs. They lay on the tassels. They hatch. You end up having these maggots that are feeding on that decomposing material, and then they start accumulating on the front of the sprayer. And so when you get done, if you do lots of acres in a day, you can have literally handfuls, if not bucketfuls of.
So it's not brand specific to the sprayer.
No.
I didn't know. Sometimes we have sprayers die, and I've never seen them covered with maggots before.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. You guys you're well covered this morning, because I think I've passed 4 different Premier sprayers on the road this morning before the dew is even off.
Yeah,
So,
we're hitting it hard.
Yeah, they're hitting it hard. And that's good, because there's still a lot of potential. Normally by this time of year, you're kind of giving that last call. This is, last call for alcohol, last call for fungicides. And I would say that we maybe have 2 weeks, right?
Really?
I can tell you that there's a lot of guys that are just now putting on their second pass. For those that are making a 2-pass system, if you're in 1-pass system, you probably missed the ideal timing, but there's not going to be nearly the penalty this year, because typically the reason why we've gone to 2 passes is so that we can get septoria in the first pass, and then we work on basically the Cercosporas in the second pass, whether that's FELS or just straight up frog eye leaf spot. This year, because we were drier earlier, there wasn't the septoria in the bottom part of the canopy, and so there's not going to be a huge penalty to not having 2 passes this year. One pass is probably going to rival a 2-pass system, but certainly, the more you understand about plant physiology, then the more attractive keeping that plant, protected early and then deeper into the season is just a big advantage, right?
Yeah.
So what I would say is, if you haven't made a fungicide application, there is certainly time. And if you made a fungicide application earlier, now is the time. Let's say you did a top shelf fungicide at R3, second, third week of July. You're going to have another opportunity to come in, maybe use a mid-tier fungicide and really protect that crop into September, because we probably won't be harvesting these fuller season varieties until the first week of October.
Yeah.
Right? So think about how much biomass still has yet to be accumulated. And the biomass we build from here on out is not leaves, it's not petioles, it's not stems, it's yield.
All grain.
It's grain, right? And so, there's a lot of opportunity. There is one thing that kind of disturbed me
Yeah, it
about
looks like
this.
you got something going on there. Tell us what you got.
Yeah, so what we've got on the end of this ear, this is obviously corn earworm feeding, and there has been a lot of corn earworms this year. And if you're not familiar with corn earworm, they typically are they're lighter colored to kind of a light green. Typically have racing stripes down the side. They'll, it's a lepidopteran. That was the word you were having trouble with, right? It's a lepidopteran insect. So the larvae is more cylindrical, and on the thorax, right behind the head, there's a segment of the worm that will have like prolegs on it. And if you have a single larvae per ear and it is got racing stripes on it, it's probably corn earworm. If it's darker in color, then it could be an ECB. You can have ECB damage on a corn ear also. If you have multiples and they're down here at the bottom, you may actually have western bean cutworm, which are really bad. And the reason why western bean cutworm are so much more damaging than just corn earworm is the fact that they are not cannibalistic, right? You hardly ever find more than one corn earworm on an ear. But with western bean cutworm, you can have multiple larvae per ear, which means that they can do significantly more damage. But it's not just the kernel loss. Right here, we were already going to tip back this last inch or so, which means that we had a good population. And so by chewing these kernels out, there's been some yield loss here, maybe 3-4 bushel. But there's another peril on a year where you have lots of moisture, the frass that they leave behind, right? So the corn earworms don't have a very developed gut. They chew along, they digest and absorb some portion of that, material. And then what comes out their tail end, which is not what you think I'm going to say. It's called frass. It's the technical word.
As we rub our foreheads.
Yeah, you just knew.
Knew it was coming.
You just knew there was an expletive coming there. But no, bug poop is called frass. And that frass is kind of partially digested, material that's still fairly high in carbohydrates. And it's a wonderful substrate for these secondary diseases to come in, right? These ear rots. And some of them are good. Some of them are... None of them are good. Some of them are way worse than others, right? So there's a few of these corn ear rots, right? Things like Aspergillus flavus, which produces aflatoxin that are really bad. Fusarium produces an aflatoxin a mycotoxin called fumonicin. Gib, which is another cultivar of Fusarium, right? Gibberella. Produces one that you're familiar with called deoxynivalenol or vomitoxin, right? These are some of the most, potent toxins known to man, and they are naturally occurring. And they oftentimes follow up behind corn earworm feeding or some kind of insect feeding.
And people might say, why is that a big deal? What do you mean toxins? Well, from a feeding standpoint, they become... elevators begin to reject those loads, and it becomes really hard to find a home for them. So it's devastating from one end of this production process to the other. So just to fill in for those who might not be familiar.
Absolutely. No, I'm so glad you said that. It's so monogastric animals, things like hogs, which you're very familiar with. That's your forte. Hogs, bears, humans, anything that has single stomach. Typically, they are more susceptible to mycotoxins, right? Ruminants, things that have multi-chamber stomachs, typically have the ability to kind of break that down, and it's not quite as damaging. It's not quite as damning as it is in monogastric animals. But in hogs, if they're gestating, it's not just parts per million. Some aflatoxins in parts per billion can cause them to abort.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, so these are significant pests.
So roll the clock back. I mean, would an insecticide in with our fungicides, would that have helped with this problem?
Yeah. So there is a history of protecting against corn earworm, but it's very difficult with normal insecticides, right? So when you try to spray with a pyrethrin, you can treat with pyrethrins, but you'd have to do it probably multiple times a week. In seed production, sweet corn production, that sort of thing, one of the things that they I'm trying to think who this technology belongs to, but the active ingredient is called chlorantraniliprole. And I believe it was a DuPont product that now that molecule is owned by FMC. And it's a component in several Syngenta products like Besiege and Volume Express. But chlorantraniliprole is oftentimes mixed with things like lambda-cyhalothrin, or you can put it in. I think the trade names elude me. It's called Coragen. Did you ever heard of Coragen?
I haven't.
Yeah, so that particular active has not just larvicidal activity, but it has ovolarvicidal activity. So it can actually kill eggs. And if you think about corn earworms, they fly around. The female runs around with a few hundred eggs in her ovidepository, and she doesn't lay them in mass like European corn borer. She will actually go around and lay a single egg on the silks, and then fly on, and that egg will hatch. That larvae will then crawl, feeding on silks right down underneath the shuck. And once he's underneath that shuck, you can't control him.
Get to him.
So the value of having this ovolarvicidal insecticide is that you get it on the silks, and the silks are emerging pretty quickly, right? 3 to 5 centimeters per day. But if you can get the timing right, it can kill the egg or the larvae, either one, but it gives you more time, right? And so that's the value of that technology. We don't have a lot of people using it in field corn because the application just has to be perfectly timed.
Yeah.
And most time corn earworm is, if we made R1 applications, we probably were incidentally killing a few corn earworm.
That's why it's so important if you're in there with fungicides to go ahead and put the insecticide in.
It is. But if you think about it, one of the things that we're changing is we've gone from R1 applications, which almost always run out of steam before we get to fruition, right?
Yep, that's true.
So we have intentionally moved to V stage applications so that we can delay, protect the lower part of the plant, and then delay that R application into an R2, R2.5, even R3 in some cases, right? And then that 3 week or 4 weeks of control you get from a top shelf fungicide will get you to potentially R5.
Yeah.
Right now 5.25 or 5.5, right? If you can get to 5.5, you're within 2 weeks of physiological maturity. Guess what? Your likelihood of losing any yield is negligible.
Good.
So.
All right. Well, I'll tell you, I don't know what else we got today. Do you have anything else, Ryan?
No, I would draw back to something he said earlier when he said trade names elude him. Just for those who aren't familiar, the trade names are like that big on the jug. The big words that he spews around are usually in print. About
They're
that
little
big.
bitty, tiny.
Yeah.
They got a lot of parentheses and
So
dashes.
as you make commitments in your life to lose weight or to become more studious in the Bible, or not Glenn, he's like, I just want to learn the hard words and not know what they're called on the shelf.
Yeah, well, it seems self-serving, but in reality, it's easier because for one active ingredient, there may be 20 different brands. And so for me, it's easier if you know the actives, then you're good. And so.
But it's always fun to give you a hard time about it.
That's true. I appreciate that. I really do. I appreciate that.
So, and I can't spew those words like you do. So, yeah. So,
Anyway.
all right.
That's all I got.
All right, that's all I've got. Glenn, thanks for being in-house. We'll probably be in for a pre-harvest discussion with you in a few weeks. We want to get back into that. It's hard to believe we're there already. So we've talked about planting conditions all the way to almost harvest again. So thanks for being here, and that's another episode of The High Ground powered by Premier Companies. Please like and subscribe.